Good morning, class. Today we are looking at multiplication in other bases. When we multiply in other bases, it's still very similar to what we do when we multiply in our own base 10. It's very similar. However, the slight variation is going to come when we multiply the numbers and it comes up to be a value that's larger than the base. So if we look at this first example, 1, 3 in base 5 times 3 in base 5, we're going to multiply those two digits together, so 3 times 3 is 9, but then we have to subtract the base. So when we subtract the base, we get 4. The 4 is going to get recorded over here, and the number of times that we could subtract 5 gets carried. So that's very similar to our addition process. And so same kind of an idea here. Now we multiply. 3 times 1 gives us 3. We add the 1 that we carried, so that gives us 4. 4 is less than our base 5, so we're just going to record it with our base 5. So 1, 3 base 5 times 3 base 5 is 4, 4 base 5. Let's look at the next one. So if we look at 3, 4 in base 5 times 2, 1 in base 5, again, we're multiplying just like we would multiply numbers in base 10. 1 times 4 gives us 4. 1 times 3 gives us 3. Now when we move down, because we're now in the next place, we still shift in. So this is, a lot of times you were trained up with either putting an X or a 0 there, and then move into the next place. So the 2 times the 4 gives us 8. 8 is larger than my base 5, so I'm subtracting the base 5, which gives me a 3 to record and a 1 to carry. Now at this point, again, we're looking at multiplying. So 3 times 2 gives us 6. 6 plus the 1 that we carried is 7. 7 minus 5 gives us a 2 that we're recording and a 1 that we would carry, but since there's nothing else that we're multiplying, we just bring that down. And now we're adding down our columns just like we would have before. So we get just 4 in our first column. 3 plus 3 gives me 6, but again, we're working in base 5. So when we're working in base 5, we subtract. So 6 minus 5 gives us 1 we record and 1 we carry. Then 2 plus 1 gives me 3, and 1 doesn't have anything to add to it, so we just bring that down. So our final answer here would be 1, 3, 1, 4 in base 5. Okay, let's try one more in base 5. If we look at 4, 3, 4 in base 5 times 2, 4 in base 5, again, we're multiplying. So here, the 4 times the 4 gives us 16. 16, I could subtract 5 3 different times. So I know that I could subtract 15 from it, right? And this is equivalent to 3 that I'm going to be carrying. So when I subtract, I get 1. That gets recorded here. 3 times that I subtracted the 5, right, my multiple of 5, and so I'm carrying a 3 in this case. Now I'm going to multiply 4 times 3, which gives me 12. 12 plus 3 gives me 15, right? So 15 minus 15 gives me 0. So I'm recording a 0, and again I'm carrying a 3. In our last multiplication for this part, 4 times 4 is 16. 16 plus 3 gives me 19. 19, again, I can subtract 15 from it, so that gives me a 4 that gets recorded. And again, this gives me a 3 that I would carry. So again, we're shifting in one place because now we're multiplying the 2 times 4. So 2 times 4 gives me 8. 8 is again larger than my base 5, so I subtract. Gives me 3 to record and 1 that gets carried. Okay, 3 times 2 gives me 6, plus 1 is 7. 7 minus 5 gives me a 2 that I record, and again a 1 that I carry. 2 times 4 gives me 8. 8 plus 1 is 9. 9 minus my 5 gives me 4 that I record, and 1 that would get carried. And now we just add down our columns just like we would with regular addition problems. Again, keeping in mind that we're working in base 5. So if you are having a tendency to be forgetful, you might put the little 5s in there to remind yourself. So 1 plus 0 gives me 1. 0 plus 3 gives me 3. 4 plus 2 is 6, so that's a 1, carry 1. Here we get 8, so that's a 3 carry 1, and that gives me 2. So 2, 3, 1, 3, 1 in base 5 is my final answer on that. Not so bad? There's a lot that goes into it, and a lot of the scratch work that I'm doing over here, a lot of that scratch work can be done in your head if you're confident. I have a tendency to not be very confident at first and write a lot of it out just so that I simply don't forget something. Or I can go back if I'm feeling like I'm making a mistake, I can go back and find where my errors were. Okay, so let's look at the next examples. The next examples, we're working in base 7. And so in base 7, we'll be looking at 4, 3 in base 7 times 2, 5 in base 7. So here again, we multiply the two numbers together. Hold that thought. I forget when I'm working with two pieces of technology that I need to make sure that I'm keeping things in the right place. So here we go. That way we're at the top of the screen. So again, we have 4, 3 in base 7, excuse me, times 2, 5 in base 7. So 5 times 3 gives me. Okay, so now let's look at some that are in different bases. So again, we're looking at multiplying in various bases. Again, if it multiplies to be something that's larger than the base, then we have to subtract and carry, and so on and so forth. So it's very similar to the multiplication that we do in base 10. Again, now you just really have to pay close attention to what base you're working in. So if we look at this 2, 2, 1 in base 3 times 2, 2 in base 3, then we're simply multiplying. So 2 times 1 gives me 2. 2 times 2 is 4, so I have to think about 4 minus 3 gives me 1 that gets recorded. The one time I subtracted gets carried. So now it's 2 times 2, which is 4, plus 1 is 5. 5 minus 3 gives me 2 that gets recorded, and again 1 that would get carried. Now again, we're putting the 0 as a placeholder, or an x, or just move it in 1. And then multiply again. So now 2 times 1 is 2, 2 times 2 is 4, so that's a 1, carry 1 again. 2 times 2 is 4, plus 1 is 5, so we're going to have a 2, carry 1. And then add down your columns. Again, don't forget that you're working in base 3, so that when you're adding, if you add up to more than base 3, you remember to carry. So 2 plus 0 is 2, 2 plus 1 gives me 3, so that's a 0, carry 1. 2 plus 2 is 4, so 4 is a 1, carry 1. Again, we add up to 4, so that's another 1, carry 1, and that gives us a 2 on the end. So 2, 1, 1, 0, 2 in base 3. So on this next one, I'm going to give you a few minutes of me not talking while you try it out. 4, 7, 6, base 8 times 2, 3 in base 8. Okay, so let's start looking at this one together. Hopefully you had a chance to finish. So 6 times 3 gives us 18. 18 I could subtract 16 from. That's going to give me a 2 that I'm carrying and a 2 that gets recorded. We multiply the next. 7 times 3 is 21, plus 2 gives me 23. Again, I can subtract 16, 24 is too many, so 16. And that gives me with a 7 remainder, so 7 gets recorded and a 2 gets carried. 4 times 3 is 12, plus 2 is 14. So 14, I'm only going to be able to subtract 1, 8 from it, correct? So that gives me 6 that I record and 1 that gets carried. And we put our 0 placeholder, and now we start multiplying in the other direction. So 6 times 2 gives me 12. 12 minus 8 gives me 4 that's getting recorded and 1 that's getting carried. 7 times 2 is 14, plus 1 is 15, so 15 minus 8 gives me 7 that I'm recording, and again 1 that's being carried. 4 times 2 gives me 8, 8 plus 1 is 9, so again 9 minus 8 gives me 1, and then again one time that I subtracted, that's being carried. So now we add down our columns, so 2 plus 0 gives me 2, 7 plus 4 is 11, so that's going to be 3, carry 1. That gives me 14, so 14 is going to give me 6, carry 1, that's 3, and that's 1 in base 8. Okay, so 1, 3, 6, 3, 2 in base 8. Not so bad. I know it's a lot of side work that takes place on this, but again, as you start becoming comfortable with it and confident with your scratch work that's off to the side here, I think you'll find that you don't need it and that you can do a lot more of it or handle a lot more of it in your head. But again, I encourage you to write it down. Even as I'm doing this, and I've practiced quite a few of these problems recently, it's still helping me to go ahead and write these things down. So sketch out what I'm thinking on the other side. Okay, so if we move on to this one in base 6, we have 5 times 3, that gives us 15. I can subtract 12, so that gives me 3 that gets recorded and a 2 that gets carried. 4 times 3 is 12, plus 2 is 14. 14 minus 12 gives me 2, so it's a 2 that gets recorded and a 2 that gets carried. It might help to think about working on things in different colors, so working on the first row in the first color, and then now I'm working through with multiplication in the second place, so maybe I put a 0 here. Now I multiply 5 times 2, I get 10. 10 minus 6 gives me 4, and I'm only carrying 1 this time. 4 times 2 is 8, plus 1 is 9. 9 minus 6 gives me 3, and a 1 that I carried. So again, now we're just adding down the columns, so this adds up to 3. This adds up to 6, so that's a 0, carry 1. Again, we're adding up to 6, so that's 0, carry 1, and then we have a 2, and again, remember that you're working in base 6. So it might be helpful to go through and look at those in that respect, and think about changing colors if you're working in pencil and then pen or something along those lines. I'm hesitant to say pen because if you make mistakes, you can't erase. So as you're working through these problems, the last 3 that are on this page are a couple of them a little more thought, I guess, that goes into them. So if we're looking at base 12, we're going to still be looking at multiplying just like we've been multiplying. Okay, so if I'm multiplying in base 12, 7 times 6 is 42. And again, I'm looking at how many 12s could I subtract from that. So 12 times 3 is 36. 12 times 4 would be 48. So I can subtract 36, which is going to give me 6 that I record and 3 that get carried. 7 times 2 is 14. 14 plus 3 is 17. So again, I'm going to subtract 12. That gives me 5 that gets recorded and 1 that gets carried. 7 times 1 is 7, plus 1 gives me 8, and I'm under my base, so no carrying on this one. Put my 0 placeholder. Again, if it's helpful to change colors, change colors. So here I would be putting in the 0. And then moving in, we'd have 6 times 4, which is 24. 24, I can subtract 24, so that gives me 0 that's recorded, and a 2, right? This is a 2 that gets carried. So 2 gets carried to my next row. 4 times 2 is 8. 8 plus 2 is 10. How do I write 10? 10 is the letter A, correct? So we need to write the A in there. Now 4 times 1 is just 4. So again, as you're adding these columns, you do have to keep in mind that you're working in base 12. So 6 plus 0 is 6. 5 plus 0 is 5. 8 plus 10 is 18. So that's going to be a 6 carry 1. And then that gives me 5 on the end there. So 5, 6, 5, 6 in base 12. Not so bad. Then we look at the next one, and we've got letters in our problem. So again, you just have to remember that A is the same as 10. So as we're going through this process, we're just multiplying, subtracting, all that. That's the same as what we have been doing. But if our number comes out to be 10 or 11, then we're writing in an A or a B. So 6 times 2 gives me, how about 3 times 2 gives me 6? 3 times 2 gives me 6. 2 times A, which is 10, gives me 20. So 20 minus 16, that's 4 that I record and 1 that I carry. 2 times 1 is 2, plus 1 gives me 3. Now we move in, so hold a 0 place or move in 1 place. 3 times 1 is 3. 1 times A is going to be A, and 1 times 1 is 1. Now we're adding down our column, so here I get 6, then I get 7. Now I get A is 13, so 13 is what? A is 10, B is 11, C is 12, D is 13. So A plus 3, that's 13, which is D that I used to represent it, and then 1 comes down, and again we're working in base 16. Okay, so important to remember that as you're going through this process, if there's a letter that represents our numbers once we get to be 10 or greater, that those are important to add in there as well. Okay, and the last example that's here is base 2. I think this is the time when I like base 2 the best because multiplication is pretty darned easy. So 1011 in base 2 times 101 in base 2, we're going to get 1101, and then we would have all zeros, right, for the next row, and then we would move in one more time again, and we'd have 1101. Okay, so again, if you use those zeros as placeholders, certainly draw those in as well, if that's helpful to keep those zeros in there as placeholders. And now we're just adding down the column, so we would have 1, 1, 1, 1 plus 1 is 2, so that is a 0 carry 1. Bring down the 1s and in base 2. Okay, so base 2, it's all 1s and 0s, right, when we go through and we do the multiplication. So not too terribly bad when we go through that process. And again, when we're adding those up, you have to remember that you're in base 2 so that only 1s and 0s are part of your answer. So for today, you are working on a review of subtraction. There is an answer key in the subfolder, so if you guys want to check your work as you're working along on this, there is an answer key for that. And then I'd also like you to attempt some of the problems in the textbook. So on page 212, I would also like you to attempt questions 31 through 42. These are all multiplication. And again, I have an answer key that will also be in the subfolder. So if you guys want to check your work as you're going, odds you can at least check the answer in the back. But if you want to see the work and the process that goes with it, you're certainly welcome to check that against my work. I'll be back again tomorrow, so we'll be practicing a little bit more addition, subtraction, multiplication. And then probably on Friday, we'll start looking at the division process. And so hopefully you guys are great on this and it all makes sense. If not, then know that I'll be back tomorrow and I'll help clarify any questions you might have. Be slow and steady in the process so that you're not forgetting things along the way, especially whatever base it is that you're working in. So behave, and I will see you tomorrow.